kia ora tato, and welcome to our webinar tonight, and a warm welcome to Celeste and Lorraine. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let me just introduce our speakers. Celeste Harrington is Programme Leader for Early Childhood Education at AUT, and she's been involved in early childhood education for over 20 years. She's held a variety of leadership roles, most recently managing the University of Auckland's group of early childhood centres, and she's passionate about the relational aspects of leadership. Thank you, Celeste. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Cool. Thank you very much.
And Lorraine Manuela, she's the director of Tots Corner Early Learning Centre, and she's been teaching in early childhood for many years too. She's also worked in a number of professional roles with children, teachers and centre leaders. Her team are focused on collaborating and learning alongside children to construct and co-construct knowledge, and they're actively engaged in research to inform their practice. So we're really delighted that you two were able to join us tonight on this webinar about leadership, such an important topic in early childhood education. So if I may begin, let's start with talking about this idea of the leader. How would you describe the role of a leader in an early childhood setting? I don't know who would like to go first.
Right, I'll hand over to you.
Shall I kick off?
Yes.
You
how do you see the role of the leader?
It's hugely complex and hugely challenging, but very exciting. You know, there's no, as in teaching, there's no day that's ever the same as another. You're dealing with a triadic. For me, it's equally about our teachers, our children and our families, and we know that if one of those legs gets wobbly, things can fall over. So there's multiple balls that you're juggling, multiple issues that you're juggling, but it's about the way that you do that and the way that you support your teachers to do that and to work collegially as a team. It's, yeah, I mean, we could go forever talking about that, but I'm going to hand over to Celeste.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Lorraine. And yes, I think probably I could just echo what you're saying if I have to be asked. I think it's about relationships. Leading is about relationships, because if you aren't in a relationship with the people that you're working with, it really doesn't work. And so I think it's about really getting to know the people that you work with. And I certainly know that that's always worked for me ever since I was managing and I'm leading not an early childhood centre, a bookshop. So even in those kinds of roles, if you really know the people that you work with and you know and you can work to their strengths, that's probably the most important thing, because people are always different, and I think it's about getting to know them. So relationships, I'd reckon, and that includes the parents and the children. Again, that triadic, as Lorraine was mentioning.
So how do you view the leadership within your centre or on previous centres that you've worked in, Celeste? Do you see leadership as something that's distributed across everyone, or is it something that's very much the role of the hierarchical leader, the person that's got that sort of formal position of leadership in the centre?
I've never found that works particularly well. I think people do need to know that there's someone that they can trust that the buck stops with them. But at the same time, that really doesn't mean that it's only the nominated leader or the people with that not named position who are leading. I certainly have worked in a myriad of centres where different people are really, really leading in different ways. And they come to the fore, sometimes in often surprising things that you think, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had an interest in that or a strength in that. So again, it comes back to knowing the people, to being able to work with their strengths and then really build on that. And that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but definitely not only the named leader. No.
Would you agree, Lorraine? How do you see?
Yeah, totally. The whāriki and the professional standards support the view that leadership is something expected of all teachers. You know, they talk about teachers being responsible, taking responsibility, having responsibility and sharing responsibility. And some people take many of those on really well, others need to be supported. It's because we're working with people and not shuffling paper that it becomes complex, and it's recognising, you know, those that you need to nurture in one way is different to those that you need to support and nurture perhaps in another way. But as Celeste said, you know, often when you share opportunities for taking on different skills and responsibilities, people rise to the occasion in the most wonderful ways that support you then as the leader, because they take over many of those roles. Yeah.
And there is so much leadership, isn't there, that if it was all resting on one person, it could be quite stressful, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's your top priority as a leader?
That's an interesting one. I think it's probably making sure for me, children would be my top priority in terms of early childhood education, because if we don't have children at the center of it, what's the point of us doing what we're doing? So I think if we keep that to the forefront, and even when things get really, really challenging or really difficult, I think if you keep children at the center, so perhaps not so much a priority, but as at the center of it all, I think that then helps the rest of it all to fall into place in a much more cohesive way, in the way that you can relate everybody together. Because often what I say to my students is, we give them group assignments and they all get really grumpy. We don't want to do group assignments. We don't like doing group assignments. But when I explain to them that when they go to work at an early childhood center, they're going to get mixed with people that they don't know. They're never going to know the people ahead of time. You get an interview and then you go and you work with a team. So if you don't know how to work with a myriad of different people, you're not going to be able to manage that. So the group assignment is a good way. And I usually do the mean thing of numbering them off, and then they have to be with those people. So they learn how to work with people that aren't necessarily their friends, but they learn how to collaborate. And I think that's what I say to them is, you're going to be working with the children. So whoever you work with, you need to be able to collaborate. So again, it's about that distributed leadership that's become a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but I do think it's quite important.
And so you find that sort of maintaining that focus on the children has a sort of effect of bringing everyone together and sort of being a bit more cohesive as a team?
Yes, absolutely.
Lorraine, what would you say your top priority was as leader?
I don't know that I can single one out. I hear very clearly what Celeste is saying and totally support what she's saying about the importance of the children, but equally the families and your teachers, because without any one of those three, our whāreki's got a gap. So I think for me, all three are a top priority, which is really problematic because it's more work, more things to think about, more stress, but they have to form that whāreki, and you can't have a hole in it. So that's the challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and just I want to ask another question before opening up the questions to our listeners tonight. What would you say is the difference between leading and managing? I mean, somebody in a formal leadership role might have aspects of both to do, but is there a difference between leadership? And is it important that we discuss the difference between these terms, leadership and management?
I think it's really important that we discuss it and think about the implications of what, for me, a manager shuffles paper and works with paper, and we all know the huge amount of compliance we have.
Certainly.
So there is a lot of paper for an education. But for me, leadership is about people. So there's a very clear distinction, although at times, of course, they merge, and that's the nature of the sector that we're in. But for me, leadership is about that pedagogical work, that supporting teachers to grow and establish, that the professional learning opportunities that we offer for people don't have to be the expensive conferences. They can be the rigorous discussions at staff meeting. They can be reading articles that, Vicky here has written, or somebody, and there's a meridian of things that we can be doing to all the time be professionally learning and supporting people to be growing in their teaching practice. So for me, there's no one top priority. It's they've got to come together, and equally supporting families and the work we do with children has to be intellectually rigorous. It has to be cutting edge. We have to be driving research, not theory driving practice anymore. It has to be the other way at times.
Thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you, Lorraine. It's quite easy for people to be named as the centre manager, but actually the leader is the aspect of it that's so much more crucial to how that people work with children. And I certainly know, and maybe someone's listening, and hi to anybody if they are there from the University of Auckland centres, they fought long and hard to be called centre leaders, not centre managers. And that was a real pedagogical battle that they had. It was prior to me coming on board, and it was really important to them to be seen as leaders, not as managers, because it is around that pedagogical understanding and working with the families and the children and the teachers to, as you say, Lorraine, grow and work together, because otherwise it just doesn't work. And of course there are that paperwork we have to do, but it would be, I think it would be sad if too many people thought of themselves as managers as opposed to leaders. I think we need leaders in early childhood, and there's been recently so many wonderful studies done on that, bringing that to the forefront for our profession. And that's what I keep on again saying to students, and I said it to the people that I worked with. We need to be professional. It's really, really important, and we need to remain current. We need to know what's happening, and that we are those teachers that people look up to for the children that we work with.
And the whole discourse in early childhood, you know, the language that we use, and people that are listening that know me well will be laughing because I've been saying this for many, many years. But, you know, why do we use the word supervisor? Why do we talk about working on the floor? These are, for me, these are factory terms. These are not educational terms. I don't hear my colleagues in primary and secondary talk about being supervisors and working the floor. You know, they work with children or they work with students. So I think the whole language that we use, as you say, in early childhood, we need to think about that seriously, because are we in fact undermining ourselves? Are we, when, you know, the parents say, oh, you're just a carer? Because if they hear us talk about working the floor and this is the supervisor, well, for me, that factory language is really dishonouring us as professionals.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you. That's also one of my key pet peeves, is saying I'm on the floor. I said, what do you do? Lying down, having a sleep?
Okay, well, thank you very much for the questions coming in. So if you'd now like to use the chat function box to send in some questions for Lorraine and Celeste, I'll do my best to field them. So some questions coming through about how to support someone who maybe doesn't want to take any kind of leadership of any aspect of the centre. What about if there are teachers that don't want to lead in any form?
What would you say, Lorraine? Have you had anybody like that?
Yeah, I guess we'd probably have to know a little bit more about the person, and the question perhaps needs to be a little bit more expanded, because like I said at the very beginning, you know, in early childhood services, and Te Whāriki and the professional standards talk about leadership. So in Te Whāriki, every strand, the last page, talks about the considerations for leadership, organisation and practice. So Te Whāriki talks about all of us as leaders. Everyone is being responsible, taking responsibility, you know, having responsibility and sharing. So you might not want to be the step up leader and lead your room as a team, but as a teacher, your role, part of that is to grow yourself as a leader. Or how do you then become a registered teacher? You know, so it's hard to, I don't want to criticise the person or the question, but you know, you need to know a little bit more, perhaps, bigger parameters around the personality and how you can nurture that person to grow, or maybe they're in the wrong profession.
I like your point as well, Lorraine, looking at Te Whāriki and pulling out those responsibilities. So maybe sometimes leadership is a term that seems like a very big action, but actually it's about taking responsibility on a daily level. Yeah.
And maybe the person, as I say, Lorraine and I don't know the context that the question was framed in, but I think perhaps maybe that person has got that idea that leadership is such a big thing, and it might be a little scary for them, and they think, oh my gosh, I'm a teacher, I don't want to be a leader. And maybe they actually are already a leader. Maybe they do. Maybe their skill might be running mat time or leading the way in which children feel engaged in the centre, but they just don't know that that's a leadership role. Perhaps that's something that could be helpful to them.
And someone suggested it might be about building self-confidence.
Yes.
Do you have any sort of good tips for how you as a leader can support teachers to develop their self-confidence and feel competent as teachers?
I think maybe at staff meetings there might be a way in which to discuss something that they might have done in the centre and say, oh, did you guys notice X? And without sort of like being all kind of sycophantic about the whole thing, but really, really praising someone for something that maybe you've noticed and that maybe they don't even know that they do. I often used to find when you do observations of teachers, and you tell them the things they do, they say, oh my gosh, I didn't know I actually did that. And I think sometimes that can be a way to do it, perhaps. And maybe Lorraine has some other ideas as well.
No, I think that's what you're saying is appropriate. Yeah, you often, you don't know what you don't know, and if you are lacking in confidence often, then you even know less. So sometimes it takes somebody to be observing and to share things with you to support you to realise, oh my goodness, yeah. And, you know, praise is a wonderful thing, and we all love it, and we all respond well to it. It's just finding those things that you really can support and praise, and working, you know, working from the positives. It's like we do with children. We don't want to always know. We don't want a needs-based situation. We want to know what they're capable of and how we can nurture them forward. Yeah.
And I'm thinking again about Celeste's point at the beginning about really knowing and spending time getting to know people. We've got a lot of people watching tonight who are taking on a leadership role for the very first time, just about to step into a team leader role. And they're asking, you know, how do they start? Where do they start? How they want to become these positive and effective and respected leaders. Where do they start? You've obviously been in your leadership journeys for some time, so
yes, I can see the grey hair.
So how does what I was trying to imply was, how does somebody get to this level that you've been able to, you know, you've been able to balance all these balls and be effective as leaders, and what's been the secret?
I sometimes think that never be afraid to ask other colleagues outside of your centre for support and for advice. You know, I have lots of colleagues that I ring and that ring me, and it might only be once or twice a year. I mean, you know, people like Vicky, like Heather from Helensville, or Therese at Browns Bay. But when you need some support, or you need just a sounding board that you can't always use your teachers for, go to other people. You don't have to be an island floating on your own, which we often do feel like in early childhood, particularly if you're just a small one centre owner or two centre. You know, there's not always a big network around you, and if there is a network, often it's a politically motivated one in different ways. So I think it's about reaching out to others, because there's not a lot, particularly in early childhood, that supports leadership. Certainly the professional standards support principals, primary and secondary and area school principals, but there's nothing that supports early childhood. And for me, there's that real gap, because it is a big jump. It is a big step from being a team leader or just working in a team to becoming a leader, no matter how small. It is a big jump.
And it can be quite challenging if you've promoted from within, because sometimes that can seem a little uncomfortable. So probably maybe as a sort of coming back to that relationship, talk to the team and tell them, hey guys, I'm feeling a bit freaked out because I'm new to this. What would you like to see me do? And maybe put it back to them, as we do with children. I think having those conversations is to say, I'm new, I'm not exactly sure, I want to get this right. What would you like to see me do? But also calling on the people who can mentor you from outside, but you're going to be at work every day. And so it's making sure that the people that you work with get on board with you and enjoy the newness for you. And you can, and I think it's never a bad thing to say that you're unsure. It's absolutely fine to say, I have absolutely no idea how to do this.
Or I need
how
time
can we
to
do it together?
Or
Exactly. So
I'm just being very open and genuine and authentic, I suppose.
Absolutely, yes. Totally.
You're right, Celeste, because that will build the relationship, and that's your foundation.
Yes. You're not coming in and saying you're the best and you know everything, but that you're in this position, you have a level of knowledge, but it's as a team you can put it all together. I always remember a colleague that I worked with when I was at Open Polytech. She used to talk about it as if you look at a wagon wheel, and if the spokes are all sticking out, the wheel won't turn, but if the spokes are sticking in, then the wheel can actually form a circle. And that really resonated with me. I've always thought about that. Of course, the wheel will go around if the spokes are working in the right way, but if they all stick it out, it's not going to happen. It's a little analogy for me.
And building those relationships, as you say, you know, trusting each other, valuing each other, not trying to be the compliance policeman, you know, not just reduced to checking emails or checking learning stories or documentation, or, you know, not. And sometimes I think for young leaders, particularly, that nervousness of being in charge or being the leader can influence them sometimes into that very strong compliance police type role, which I think we need to be really wary of. And
you really need to trust people. I think that's important. And I just saw a colleague about saying have a clear vision. I think, yes, absolutely. Because if you have a clear vision, other people can understand what you're saying. I think that's really important. Because if you don't know what you're doing, and it's okay to say you're not exactly sure, but you need to say, well, this is where we are now, and this is where we'd like to be. That's really have that clarity of vision to know, wow, this is our center, and that sense of belonging.
And this is what makes us special, because we are special as a team. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that, Celeste. I think that's a really good point to move us away from that managerial policing, as you said, Lorraine.
Exactly.
Focus on the children and our vision for what we're trying to achieve here. Yeah,
absolutely.
I've also had a very interesting comment, Celeste, someone asking, explaining that for them, appreciative inquiry that they learned from you was very helpful to their practice, and they're just asking if you could talk a bit more about it now, and I'm intrigued. So.
oh gosh. Well, I think again, it's what I was saying before is, well, I noticed that you're doing this, and I really enjoy it, and that you really know who that person is. Again, it comes back to that whole thing of knowing the people that you work with, but asking them questions. It's not that you always necessarily have to absolutely agree with people. You can have some points of difference and not understand quite, well, how did you do this? How did you come to that place? And never coming in to judge, because it fits in with what Lorraine was saying before. You don't want to be the compliance police, because you never know what happened before you walked into the room, why X might be happening. And it's about asking, I wonder how that happened, or how did that happen? I hope that I'm explaining that correctly to whoever it was who asked that question. But it's really about recognizing that person and being appreciative of who they are and them as a person, because too often people get forgotten. And you go in and you have to, I always used to go in and say hello to every single person in the team, because it's not only the center leaders. If I was sort of looking after the different centers in the different roles, it was making sure that I heard everybody, and I knew what people were doing, and I still do. And it's really important to have those connections, and then you can work with them and say, I know you did that. How can you help us in the staff meeting to support that?
These are really good strategies. Thank you so much. I know that we don't want to talk about very specific instances of leadership because it's impossible for you to know people's contexts, but some people are asking questions where they're having really problems with getting staff members on board, teachers who are saying, I'm not paid to do this, or teachers that pretend that they don't understand a message that's given. How would you deal with those kind of issues? Not an easy question, I know.
No. They're challenging, aren't they? And I don't deal with very difficult, challenging questions very well at all, I don't think. I guess it's just talking, isn't it? It's about trying to build a relationship with that person and talking things through. And because often there's something underpinning that. There might be other things happening in the centre. There may be somebody else in the room. And every person is different. How you handle a situation for one teacher, you'd handle it quite differently with another.
Absolutely.
Teacher. So as you say, Celeste, you build those relationships, you get to know people, hopefully what supports one teacher and you support another in a different way. That's one of the hardest things when you have a staff member that is, for you, problematic and can be destabilizing for your whole team, because it then becomes a very negative spiral. It's very, very challenging. Yeah.
And it's really, I think, just exactly what you're saying, Lorraine. One doesn't always know the answers, and sometimes you have to go and say, there's something not working out here, what's going on, and just really trying to find out, because it could be something that you never considered, absolutely nothing to do with where you're at, or where you think that the teacher's at, and it might have nothing to do with work. It might be something that's going on at home, or it's just really about knowing. And as Lorraine said, maybe they're just not happy in that place because there's a personality clash, and that's can sometimes happen. We don't always get on with everybody that we work with, and sometimes you just have to recognize, oh my gosh, this is not the place for me, and then you go, and then it's fine. And so long as you do it in a professional way, and you maybe choose to leave a place because you're not maybe that happy, that's all right. You don't have to go and badmouth everyone. You can just say, this isn't for me, I'm going to try somewhere else, and that's perfectly fine. We all have that right to change positions, so long as we remain professional.
Yeah. Can I ask if you find reflection to be a useful tool as a leader? Is that something that you would spend some time
reflection, or asking us teachers to be reflective?
Personally as a leader, on your own leadership.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I think about things a lot. I reflect on it. I think, how could I have done that a little differently? What could I'm constantly questioning and wondering if the way I maybe did something could have been done in a better way, and thinking about it. Not always in it. I don't mean that like I'm so awful or anything like that, but it's really important to reflect. And I probably had the best teacher for reflection. It was D.T. Hill. She taught me how to reflect, and she was awesome. So I have to be good at reflection after her. It was very challenging, but I think it's an important part of being an educator.
Absolutely.
And it's getting that balance, isn't it, between reflecting and thinking about how you've handled something, and how could I have done it differently? Maybe if I'd have said this, or shouldn't I have said anything, or could I have tried something different? And it's getting that balance between beating yourself up and actually I could have done that better, and acknowledging that, but moving on, because when you are the leader, it can be a very isolating and solo place. And no matter how fabulous your team are, at the end of the day, you're still there and on your own, and they are there to support you, and they can be amazing. But so reflection's absolutely vital, but there's also that balance between being positive and letting the negative run through your head.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you find, you talked about having a network or someone else who's in a leadership position to talk to outside of your own centre? Do you find that helps with your reflective practice too? Those conversations with people outside your own centre? Yeah.
Because there's always situations where someone will suggest something, you think, why didn't I think of that? Of course. Well, gosh, that's interesting. I don't know whether I agree with that, but hang on, I need to think about it. Why don't I agree with that? I think I love chatting with other centre leaders.
I think you also come to see things differently as you talk, as you hear yourself talking. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to move on now to how we encourage teachers to collaborate. And we mentioned at the beginning, Lorraine, that's a really big part of what your teachers do in your centres. So how do we get teachers all on board? How do we get team buy-in for what we're trying to achieve with children? And how do we get teachers to work together well? Any thoughts?
Well, it's like we've all said, everything revolves around building those relationships within the team, and then relationships within the centre. So certainly I believe staff meetings are a really powerful tool for that, to build that team understanding. And people can come with different perspectives, different thoughts, different ideas. And it's interesting how, you'll hear teachers negotiating and talking about different things, and you can almost see the cogs turning and people thinking, gosh, I didn't think of it from that perspective. Oh, gosh, that's interesting. I've always thought this, but maybe I could actually think about what you're saying there. So it's about trying to bring those ideas together and have people working together when it's appropriate, when they can, without overloading people. But it's an ongoing challenge.
It is. And I think you're right, Lorraine, and staff meetings are such a wonderful opportunity, but as you say, it's quite difficult, and you don't want to overwhelm people. So I know a couple of centre leaders that I know used their online portfolio forum, whichever that was, Story Park Educa, whichever they did, they used that for the kind of the housekeeping type stuff, those things that you need to actually communicate about. Do we have enough toilet paper? All that kind of real kind of stuff of the centre, the housekeeping aspects.
That can take up so much time of your meeting. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that the meeting was then able to be held, firstly, with some really nice food. I think food's really important. Because you're tired and hungry after a long day. And I think that's really important to have a nice somehow manage your budget in a way that you can have some nice, have people cook sometimes. People have done that as well. And then maybe using a specific reading, as I know Lorraine mentioned that in before, you don't have to go and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars going to conferences. Don't get me wrong, we want people to go to conferences, but that's not the only way that people can learn. And you could provide an interesting reading, find something that might provoke that collaboration and that interesting conversation, and maybe give different people different parts to read. and feedback on, so that not everybody feels overwhelmed by suddenly having to do homework, but rather that it's a way to collaborate and have interesting conversations about things that might be coming up in the centre, something that might have happened, or some way you want to really support the children and their understanding. So always bringing it back to being the teacher that you are in a professional way, and that can sometimes really build that collaboration between people.
Thank you. What about in a situation like a play centre context where there isn't a positional leader as such? How do you have any tips for how to encourage leadership of everybody in a play centre team?
Is there a parent that's responsible on the day, or do they have a week or a month of responsibility? Or
I think play centres can be run quite differently, and some do have leadership roles and some don't. And the questions come in about having a very flat leadership structure.
Gosh, I'm a little bit out of my depth because I've never been a play centre mum.
Yeah, and I don't know either.
I'm 40 years, so.
I would think that it would be fine to find somebody who might, again, try to work to each other's strengths as a team, maybe have a meeting as a team. I really don't know how many there would be, if you could actually have a meeting with all the parents, or if that wouldn't work, or if they're some kind of leaders who maybe manage the funds, and then find somebody who would take charge. And perhaps that might be a way to say, oh, well, you've got a strength in that, you sing really well, so you take the leadership of that, or however that might work.
Or that collaborative kind of basis type. Yeah.
Also, I think perhaps if you're sorry. No, that's all right. But also, I think if you're the person at Play Centre who really wants to, see some of these things happen, maybe take the leadership helm.
Yeah. Yes, everybody else might be really grateful.
Yes. We've had some questions coming in about appraisal and mentoring and coaching as being useful skills. I know that those are also skills that you yourselves use too, but also perhaps we need to dedicate another webinar to those kinds of things, and we'll certainly.
Otherwise, we'll be here till midnight, probably.
Yes.
And appraisal is a big thing that another webinar would be an excellent idea.
Yeah. What about pedagogical leadership? That's a term that comes up in the early childhood community. And how does that differ? Do you see that as working in a similar way as distributed leadership, that teachers sort of take on aspects of pedagogical leadership as suits their strengths and interests? Or Lorraine, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. It's certainly a newish word, isn't it, in early childhood education, the pedagogical leadership. But I think it's, and I'm not really one for words in terms of what they actually represent. So whether we call it distributed, whether it's shared leadership, but I think somebody or a team needs to be driving the pedagogy in the centre, and how that works is relevant only for each centre to establish.
Yeah.
But for me, the pedagogical underpinning of what you're doing is absolutely vital to the quality of the opportunities you're offering children. So it does have to be driven fairly consciously, but whether that's just the leader, or whether that's team leaders, or whether that's everyone in different roles, and utilising everyone's strengths, but it needs to be driven. Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything will then stem from your philosophy. I think that's really important, because you can't do that unless you have a really cohesive philosophy that everybody buys into. I think that's a really important part, because otherwise you can't do that work, that everybody can do their little part. And as you say, Lorraine, it could be one person, several people, but that buy-in is really quite
I think the strategy you mentioned before, Celeste, about having all that housekeeping happening outside of meetings and having a real clear focus that we're here to do pedagogical thinking about children's learning in this meeting, and that's what our team work is about in a meeting. That could also be very useful.
Because otherwise the children can sometimes get forgotten, and that's really a bit sad. They need to stay central to us as teachers and why we're there.
And I'm always saddened when I hear parents particularly say, oh, they're 4 and they're so ready for school. And I think, I don't know that they are. I just think the program, they might be bored. I think we need to look at the program that we're offering, because I don't think, we all know that 4-year-olds are not ready for a formal school structure. And it's questionable whether 5- and 6-year-olds are too. But certainly you know, we need to be looking wider than let's just move them on to the next level because they're a little bit problematic in the centre.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
how do you build that focus in your centre, Lorraine? I mean, what are the expectations of teachers or expectations of meetings, or you know, how do you build this sense that we're constantly trying to improve our programme and we're thinking pedagogically all the time?
I think, as Celeste said, you have to have a very clear philosophy and a clear focus on what drives you. So we are very, you know, strongly focused and by Te Whāriki, but are also very inspired by the teachers in Reggio Emilia and the approach that they use, which for me is very intellectually rigorous. So we have to unpack that and think, what is it? What is it that I can keep offering children to get them? You know, we want our children to be questioners, to be researchers, to be investigators, to enjoy coming and to be challenging all the time, and that just doesn't happen. Plonking the Play-Doh on the table and pouring on some glitter isn't intellectually rigorous. You know, doing the same puzzle and looking at the same books that you've looked at week after week, month after month, for me, isn't offering anything intellectually rigorous for children. Every space in the centre should be curated in a way that supports them to want to investigate it and to find out what's happening and what can they do. So for me, that whole understanding of pedagogy is driven by all of us sharing that belief and sharing that philosophy. And I guess if somebody joined our team that was uncomfortable with that, they would soon not be part of the team, because we're all very passionate about, you know, our belief and what we see as really good practice for us and for children. And we share that with our families by having, you know, family evenings and called, you know, stories from within our walls, or come and see what's happening. And we always put on wine and cheese or coffee and nibbles and have a little presentation, or the teachers might share presentations in the rooms of the, you know, and the parents of the children in each room do that. But lots of ways of keeping in dialogue with your families to support that. Yeah. Hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. And so emotionally invested to be able to do this work. I sense that we keep coming back to this idea of getting to know people, building those relationships. And so where I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in about people that are challenging to work with, that seems to be a theme of our conversation tonight, and that what you would maybe suggest where people in the team aren't feeling so part of the team, where they're not contributing very much. These are the things that we could keep coming back to.
And I think keep coming back to yourself as a leader. Are you becoming a little bit of the compliance police because it's all too challenging to be pedagogically focused? I don't know. You know, sometimes, you know, we always see the other person as the problem, but sometimes we have to look at ourselves too, and there's got to be two sides to every issue. And we know that, and the staff often don't. We know more, you know, something that's happening, but you can't share it with other teachers or whatever. But it concerns me when I hear the number of teachers or the number of leaders that talk about the challenging staff they have.
Yeah. And I think it again comes to maybe trying to talk to people again, like seeing what's bothersome for them. I mean, it could be that it's an easy thing to unpack, that they might be passionate about something. As you say, maybe they're amazing at some certain aspect, but nobody's actually valued that or bothered to even find out that they're passionate about that. I know that it's difficult, and it is working with a team of people, particularly if in a very large centre, it can be really, really challenging, because you've got so many different personalities and there's so many things that you need to keep on top to try and keep everyone okay. But it's just about, as Lorraine said, coming back to how could I make a difference? Constantly looking at yourself to think, how can I, as the leader or the person in this space, what can I do to make a difference? And maybe talking to the other people who work there as well, and find out what they could do to support you, and how you can kind of challenge people in a nice way. Say, come on guys, this is not working. And if you bring it back to the children, I often used to find if people were feeling a little teachy or unhappy in some way, like, what can we do to make it better for the children? And most people who are in early childhood do it because they genuinely want to be there for the children. And often that might just be a time to, like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. What was I thinking? And it often helps. Didn't always, to be fair, but at most of the time.
It's about those courageous conversations, isn't
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yes, I saw that word flash up. I thought,
Yes.
oh, I forgot about mentioning that. So thanks to whoever said courageous conversations are really important.
But would one of you mind just expanding on that for those who maybe haven't heard of courageous conversations?
Oh, Lorraine, I'm sure you've done far more than me.
I'm not good
Although I've done a few.
I guess it's about those conversations that are that are the really difficult ones, that we have to have one-on-one, and you know, to unpack a situation that you're really uncomfortable with. But as a leader, there's always so many implications in whatever you're doing. You know, there's employment relations issues that you have to think about in terms of the wording that you use when you're talking to somebody that, you know, you might be unhappy with, or they unhappy with you, and therefore they want to, you know, there's multiple issues that as leaders is really complex that often other staff don't know, and you wouldn't of course share it with them. But those courageous conversations, I always think, are the most challenging often, and sometimes they can be fabulous. And as Celeste said, you can find out something about someone that you didn't realise and think, oh my goodness, if only we'd known, we could have helped you through this. Or
Correct,
they can be really hard.
And there's some good tips on the Teaching Council website around courageous conversations. There's some things that you can watch or you can read, and that's sometimes helpful to see it from another perspective. I know that Barbara Watson did some work on that, and she does a little wee video of having a courageous conversation, and that's really helpful to teachers as well. If you haven't experienced that, that's a good thing to have a look at.
Thank you.
And about, you know, the basic things like the I statements, as opposed to, you know, you this and you that. It's about I'm feeling this and I'm so those are
Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely some skills that leaders can pick up to help with these situations. And I appreciate tonight we've kind of looked at the more underpinning principles of leadership. I'd like to finish with 2 more questions, if I may keep you on for a little bit longer. One question I think is really important is about leadership well-being, or the leader's well-being, about ensuring that we don't get burnt out as leaders, and that emotional exhaustion actually that can come alongside a leadership role. Do you have any tips for how we deal with that?
You have to take time for yourself. That's really hard. I can talk this. I don't know about how good I am at doing it. So do as I say, not as I do.
Yes.
My staff will be laughing, saying she has wine every night. That's
there you go.
And we're advocating wine as
absolutely
being strategy.
And I mean, what we're doing now, I think, is also a really important thing, is you've got to be able to laugh. I think it's really important. You've got to have some humor, have somebody that you can laugh with, have someone that you can share that with who maybe isn't so involved in it, whether that be a significant person in your life or a friend, or you know, things like that. But taking some time, and I really think your team, if you explain to them, hey guys, I need X, I do think that people respect that and say, I'm going to take this afternoon, or whatever it is you might need, because otherwise I'm going to become a real horrible monster for you to have to work with. And if you do it in a way that they can understand, mostly people are fine about that.
It's probably quite good role modeling as well.
Yes, because you do feel so guilty if you're leaving and you think, oh my goodness, they're so busy and I feel so terrible. But if you don't help yourself, you can't help them.
That's right. Yeah. And a strong team pulling together knows that, because you do that for them. You know.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So, it's about working together. I've got a friend who used to say to me, Lorraine, you're not actually running the country. This is just yourself. And it's a really good saying, and I sometimes say it to myself, because, you know, sometimes you think a problem is this big and what am I going to do, and this da-da-da, and then I think I'm actually not running the country, you know, like get a girlfriend. So
And thank you. And a final question that intrigued me is about, firstly, about books to read on leadership that you would recommend, and also about who's actually inspired you as leaders. So are there any sort of people or books that have sort of really inspired your practice as leaders that we could finish by recommending tonight?
Actually, funny enough, I love books, so you don't want to get me started on books, but there was a book that I really wanted to be able to show to people, and I've jolly well with this lockdown, it's in my office, so I don't have it here. I brought a lot of my books home. We were allowed to pack up and stuff, but I didn't. But it's a really interesting book written by a woman on Māori leadership, and it's really, really interesting. It's looks at how it's navigating the seas, and it's looking at it from a navigational point of view, and how you really listen to your heart when you're a leader, because it's not a clear path. You don't go from A to Z in a straight line. You just don't know, and it's a myriad of ways. And this book, I can send it through to Nina, the name of it. I've gone absolutely blank now.
Yes.
I just can't remember, but it's really has always been inspirational to me, and made me feel a little bit less worried about how I lead, because I realized if you follow your heart, you can be a better leader, and it just does it really well. So I'll send that through, and Education Hub can put it up.
Thank you.
If that's okay.
We will. Thank you, Celeste. A phrase did come up on the chat about Fatu Manawa, seeing your heart eyes.
Yes,
I don't know
absolutely.
if that would be related. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, yes, please do send us the information, and we have a Facebook page, so we can put it up on the Facebook page.
Oh, cool. Absolutely. I'll do that.
Lorraine, any
I'm just going blank too. I've got 2 books and I can see them on my shelf in my office, but I can't think of the names. But I also tend to enjoy reading articles, because it's easier. It's late at night and you're exhausted and you can't sleep, so you read. Yes. So Dr. Maria Cooper from the University of Auckland, her thesis around leadership, and particularly with infants and toddlers. And
she's also written a resource for our website, so she's on the
Well,
Education Hub as well. So
absolutely,
so that's one place to find her.
You've written, Vicky, from your thesis, around leadership and what that looks like, and how that's intertwined with our practice. I think there's lots of good articles, and even listening and supporting teachers to listen to TED Talks. And different things that really challenge your thinking, and they're short and they're snappy, and they're doable at the end of a long, tiring day when you then come home.
And also sometimes quite outside of early childhood education, but there are, they really relate to what's happening for us, and we can really unpack some of the principles there.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And as to a person, there are probably a number of people that inspired me, but funnily enough, nobody here. I didn't grow up in New Zealand, and I worked with a woman. I used to work in an antiquarian bookshop, and the one person who was one of the owners there, she just sort of took me under her wing, and she just treated me like I could do things. Right. She just sort of had this expectation that I could, and I was about 23 or 24, and I was utterly terrified. I really didn't have a whole heap of confidence, and we went. We flew from Cape Town to Durban, and we got to the airport, and she said, "Oh, this is a manual car. I don't drive manual cars. You'll have to drive it." I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to drive in the streets. I don't know what to do." And we were going to this author's house to catalogue all his books, and she just expected that I'd know how to do this. And her very belief in me is what gave me the belief in myself. Right. So I think I really learned a lot from that, and I will always be grateful to her for that.
Often it can be experiences as well as just reading things, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
People,
Well, thank you, Celeste and Lorraine, and thank you also to all the people who have joined us on this Zoom webinar tonight. It's been an amazing chat going alongside your conversation. You've inspired so many ideas, and I would really welcome everybody to join our Facebook group and start chatting to each other on there, because you've got so much that you can offer each other in terms of ideas for leadership. And it seems to me that's the kind of support structure that you recommended, Lorraine, about having a bit of a network. If there's somewhere to go, our Facebook forum could be just that forum for you. So thank you, Celeste and Lorraine. I've learned so much tonight. I loved opening up with that idea of the triadic, Lorraine, and juggling these balls. I now have this vision of leadership as this the juggling act, and Celeste, the key idea I take away from you is about the idea of focusing on the children, and whatever the sort of issues between the grown-ups are, coming back to this idea of the children and putting that on the table in front of us to reunite us around a common goal. Yes, thank you so much. The pedagogical leadership also was really informative. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
We look forward to seeing your books on our, we'll put the links up to your books.
Okay. I'll send them through. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone.
Okay.